First, let me say thank you all for coming out today to join us for a discussion about what is undoubtedly one of the most important economic issues facing our country today. The Green Movement, the Obama administration's climate agenda, and looming rules that will further restrict our access to affordable energy. My name is Greg Conco. I'm the Executive Director of the Competitive Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. I know that some of you in the room know CEI, but for the benefit of those of you who do not, let me say that CEI is a free market research and advocacy organization that focuses on regulatory policy, and we work to remove government-created barriers to economic freedom, innovation, and prosperity. Like traditional think tanks, we do produce insightful and timely research, but we know that research is not enough. We also build coalitions to advocate for broad public policy change on Capitol Hill, in state houses, in regulatory agencies, and when necessary, we even go to court to use litigation to defend the Constitution, defend property rights, promote the rule of law. And today's topic gives us an opportunity to look at all of those tools in our basket: analysis, coalition building, advocacy, and litigation. We're also very happy to be working with the Independence Institute on this particular battle, the battle over affordable and to defend affordable energy and against climate policies that restrict access to affordable energy. Independence is one of the most effective and aggressive defenders of free enterprise in the country, and they have been a remarkable and reliable ally. So thank you very much to John and to Amy for helping us, working with us closely in this and a lot of other battles that we are engaged in. I want to say a special thank you to Cherish in the back, who helped make today's event possible. But while CEI is proud to be involved in this fight with independence, I surely don't have to tell you how important the stakes are. The Clean Power Plan alone will add billions, if not tens of billions of dollars of cost to individual consumers and the American economy every year. And it's just one of the elements of the green agenda to restrict carbon fuels. But the true costs of all these measures won't be measured in dollars and cents alone. In fact, the real effect is going to make it harder to heat our homes, to light our schools and our hospitals, to power our factories and our offices. I don't think it's overstatement to say that the war on affordable energy is going to have a material and negative impact on the life and the livelihoods of every man, woman, and child in the country. So it is hugely important that we're involved in this fight. But what is it that we're going to get from these energy restrictions? Well, if the Environmental Protection Agency is to be believed, and that is a big if, mind you, but if the Environmental Protection Agency is to be believed, the Clean Power Plan is going to give us a reduction of 2/100ths of a degree Celsius in warming 100 years from now. I kid you not. 0.02 degrees Celsius in 100 years. So now, to the green establishment, the elimination or restrictions on fossil fuels is a worthwhile goal in and of itself, and no price is too high to pay. But you, I think, can forgive us for thinking otherwise, which is why it's important that we are all here today to discuss this very important issue. It's my pleasure now. I'm going to turn the podium over to John and ultimately to Amy and the speakers. But again, I did want to thank you all for coming out and for taking this very, very seriously. Thank you very much.
So far, the most enjoyable part of this is to see a lawyer sit and watch the rest of you eat. I just somehow find that satisfying and some sort of compensation. Hey, I'm John Caldera. I run the Independence Institute, and I'm just thrilled that you're here. I want to make mention of the importance of this building and the importance of the work that we do, trying to bring coalitions together. And a lot of magic happens in this building from different groups that meet on the center-right coalitions that have lots and lots of disagreements, and they work them out in rooms like this and other meeting rooms that we have throughout the building. And politics is the game of addition. It's one of the reasons why the left does so well and the right does so poorly. We don't bring ourselves together very well. And I've got to just thank Competitive Enterprise Institute for being such tireless partners with us as we fight for energy independence in this country and try to keep Colorado free from a stifling regulatory state that would destroy such a big part of our economy and hurt so many people. And CEI is a different organization. I think they match our personality in that, yeah, they put out great intellectual work, but they're also not afraid to be, how to put it, disliked by those in power. And so towards that, we'll get going. We've got this event is being Ustreamed, so people are watching from all over the nation, which means 3 guys in the EPA offices in DC. But to them, we want to make sure that they hear everything you say, so please use your microphones. Amy Cook has just been a firebrand on this issue and has just done an incredible job bringing together people on this issue and being a thorn in the side of the Green Coalition and the crony capitalists who really want to make a lot of money at the expense of working families. So why don't I just send it over to Amy to kick us off.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Competitive Enterprise Institute, for being here, and to all of you for coming and being willing to listen to this. I will say, not only do I thank Competitive Enterprise Institute, I also blame you. And 6 years ago, I walked into our offices then in Golden and walked by Mike Krause's office, who said, "Oh, Amy will do it." And I said, "Do what?" And he said, "Oh, the Denver Business Journal can't find anybody to write from a market perspective on tiered energy rates. So you get to do it." I said, "I don't know anything about electricity or energy policy. In fact, what I do know wouldn't even fill up a thimble." They said, "Well, that's okay, because we're bringing on Competitive Enterprise Institute and William Yateman. And ever since then, I've been addicted to energy policy like crack cocaine. So I blame you guys for it." But from those humble beginnings some 6 years ago, we have turned into a true bona fide, credible policy center. And real quickly, I want to thank the people who make the magic in this building on energy policy: Michael Sandoval and Simon Lomax. Also working with us now, the Honorable Sean Mitchell. We have the state's only really attractive energy economist in Courtney Crouch. She's with us. And then our interns, Sarah, Annie, and Andrew. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We can't do this great work or fill a room like this without all of you. So with that, let's get to the people that really matter, the people you want to hear from today. And I am proud to introduce our first panelist. He has been a friend. He has been a great resource, an ally, really part of that intellectual steering committee on how to fight back against the controversial and not so clean power plan. And it's an attorney. Don't hold that against him. He's one of the good guys. He's a partner with Wilkinson, Barker, and Knauer. He also used to be the chair of the Colorado Public Utilities Commission under then Governor Bill Owens. So did great work there. So he knows of what he speaks. He also began his regulatory career, first Assistant Attorney General for Regulatory Law in the Colorado AG's office. Now, is that one of those things where the longer your title, the less responsibility you have? That's what I thought. he clerked for the Honorable Richard Mach of the United States District Court for the District of Colorado. And he and his two partners over at Wilkinson, Barker, and Knauer, including Greg Sopkin and Matt Larson, they have penned some of the best intellectual work on what the Clean Power Plan will mean to the states. So you can go to their website and find all of that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Ray Gifford.
Great. Is it better if I stand or?
Yeah, let's
stand?
just stand, if that's okay.
All right, no problem.
Do you want to have your laptop here?
Yeah, I just need a couple notes. So I'm going to be. I'm going to start with a recent history lesson, and then talk about, once we get to the present day, what happens next. I'm assuming since you're here, you've heard about the Clean Power Plan. And let's go back to the mists of time, 2007, when in a case called Massachusetts v. EPA, the Supreme Court, by a 5-4 vote, upheld EPA's so-called endangerment finding that carbon dioxide could be regulated under the Clean Air Act. That set in motion the rule that we have today. In 2011, the president came out with his climate action plan. That climate action plan called for a 30% reduction of carbon dioxide from America's power plants by 2030. Now, it matters quite a bit when your baseline year is, but he didn't really talk about that in the climate action plan. And out of that, we got the Clean Power Plan. The Clean Power Plan is a rule proposed by EPA. It's only a couple thousand pages. And it is totalistic in its ambition for how the American power sector will be transformed. It, in the final rule, seeks or ends up with a 32% carbon dioxide reduction from American power plants by 2030. Now, I am not going to spend the next 3 hours telling you the mechanics of how that's supposed to work. But what EPA did in short is, under the Clean Air Act, a utility or an emitter has to come up with what's called, using the best system of emission reduction, BSER to you environmental law geeks. And using that best system of emission reductions, you get these carbon reductions over a series of compliance periods that the EPA designs in the rule. So with me so far? For the first time in any Clean Air Act rule, EPA defines system to go out, so-called outside of the fence. So instead of the old Clean Air Act method of defining BSER, which is you've got a stack, and out of that stack comes SOx and NOx and other bad things, and you get handed a permit that says you cannot emit more than this amount of this pollutant. Under the new rule, what EPA says, the entire electric system is a system, and under that system, we can derive that the best system, which is a hypothetical future reduction of carbon, is done through these in these three ways. One is you get improvements at the stack, which again is what an old Clean Air Act rule would look like. And they figure you can get 1 to 2% increase in carbon efficiency on a modern coal plant, for instance. 2 is switching, in essence, from coal to natural gas. Natural gas emits about half as much carbon dioxide as coal. And 3 is additions of renewables. And what they use is a standard called potential renewables, which took the largest additions of renewable capacity in the US from 2010 to 2014. They picked the year when we had the largest increment of additions of renewable capacity. Okay, I know I'm getting in the weeds here, but I'm going to get to a punchline soon. But it's important to understand the assumptions as to how this rule works, as to how they get to the end game. So they said, what is the highest potential addition of renewable capacity onto the electric system? For that, they chose the year 2012, when we added, I think, 13,000 megawatts of wind capacity to the system. Now, interactively, does anybody else know what was happening at the end of 2012 and why it may affect your addition of wind to your system? Yes, the production tax credit for wind was set to expire at the end of 2012. What that meant, if you were a utility or a renewable energy developer, is guess when you put in your renewable project? 2012. So what EPA did is they took this number and said you can add that much renewable energy year over year from 2023 to 2030 to the end of the compliance period. So what you end up with, and this is what's relevant for the state and for a utility, is EPA in this final rule shows up with a carbon budget for your state. And that carbon budget is derived from these three building blocks. The mass predominance of is going to be additions of potential renewables to the system. We'll talk a little bit about what problems that creates, but I think you may be able to see them a little bit over the horizon. So what EPA says is, look, states, and the way the Clean Air Act works, it's a cooperative federalist statute. So the EPA sets the standard. The state then, under the State Department of Public Health and Environment here, CDPHE, all the correlate agencies, they have to come forward with a plan that says, EPA, this is how we reduce our carbon from our electric generating units within our states by 30% by 2030. The EPA then either says good, bad, or change this, or we're going to impose a federal plan. So every state in this final rule was handed a carbon budget. Colorado's carbon budget, just for those keeping track at home, is 1,174 tons of CO2 per megawatt hour. A coal plant, just by way of rough estimate, is 2,000. So you're getting a 40.5% reduction in CO2 for the state of Colorado from the 2012 baseline that EPA chose. So what then does the state have to do? The state has to go, first of all, to all of its electric generators. In Colorado, that's Xcel Energy, Black Hills, Tri-State Generation and Transmission, and the Colorado Municipal Utilities, Platte River Power Authority, Colorado Springs Utility, and say, look, guys, we got to get 40% less carbon into the system, and we have to send EPA a plan by 2018. Now, what is the plan supposed to look like, and what's it going to look like? Well, first of all, let's have an interruption in this whole process. When last Tuesday, the United States Supreme Court, for the first time in at least half a century, stayed the EPA's Clean Power Plan rule and said that you will not move forward with this rule until we've either granted cert or change our minds on this stay. And by the way, we're not going to. So the rule right now is not in effect. It has been stayed by the United States Supreme Court. Unfortunately, as we all know, and may he rest in peace, we lost Justice Scalia this last weekend which means you now have a Supreme Court that on the stay voted 5-4 for the stay. Until we get a new justice, looks like it's deadlocked 4-4. The appeal of this rule is being led by 29 states, Myron? 29 states have appealed this rule to the District Court of Columbia. That case is going forward. Briefs are actually due Friday. In that case, the general consensus of the appellate lawyers I've spoken with is that that case the rule will be upheld by the DC Circuit. The DC Circuit has been effectively packed by Harry Reid's getting rid of the filibuster. The panel, at least according to most ad law watchers, looks favorable to the government. In the meantime, but this is the beauty, and if you're ready to tear your hair out or start crying, it does get worse. So you've got the legal process going on up here, and with the passing of Justice Scalia, it does not look nearly as promising as path as it looked like last Tuesday night. But given the time frames of compliance with this rule, and given the time frames in the utility industry, absolutely, you have to start moving toward compliance sooner rather than later. And that was the genius of EPA's rule, which is they set this interim compliance deadline in 2022, by which time the states would have to reach at least a certain quantum of carbon reductions from their electric generation units. What that means in practice is that a utility that has a coal-fired station has to either make the decision to shut it down now to meet the 2022 deadline, or has to figure out some way to buy credits. Now that's the final punchline, and then I'll let Myron jump in here and maybe we can have some back and forth. How do you comply with this rule? You may remember when Congress voted down cap and trade legislation, and it doesn't even get close. Well, under the EPA's preferred method of compliance, they recommend what's called mass-based carbon trading, whereupon each state enlists itself into a national market where carbon emissions from electric generation units are capped and then traded across the states as a lower cost compliance method versus just doing it on a state-by-state basis. So what you're getting, and what the legal path looks very much darker than it did, say, a week ago, is the states slowly lumbering toward a national cap and trade. And we've already got it in certain parts of the country, and it's certainly where the environmental advocates want to take the rest of it. And with that, I'll let Myron take over.
And thank you, Ray. I now want to go slit my wrist. No. I want to welcome Myron Ebell from the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Myron is CEI's director for the Center for Energy and Environment, which is true in its bio when it says one of the most effective advocates for free market environmentalism. He also chairs the Cooler Heads Coalition, which is a coalition of 28 nonprofit groups that have the courage to be called deniers, I guess, but question global warming alarmism and oppose energy rationing policies. The thing about Myron that I'm wildly jealous of, but also proud that he's my friend, is that Business Insider named him third on its global list of the 10 most respected global warming skeptics, and commented, Myron Ebell may be enemy number one to the current climate change community, so there's a wanted poster for him. Rolling Stone also named him one of the top 6 misleaders. I guess that was before they did the UVA story. On the list with them, Senator James Inhofe, and of course, late great novelist Michael Crichton. There is a whole bunch more to know about Myron and Ray as well. If you pick up some of the literature we have over on the table over here. But with that, Myron, come on up.
Thank you, Amy. It's great to be here. Thank you all for coming, and I'd like to thank John and Amy and the whole team at Independence Institute for having us here at CEI. You met Greg Conco, but we also have from CEI Gordon Cummings, and you might want to chat with him afterwards. Of course, it's always great to get out of Washington, but I'm particularly glad to be here in Denver. Amy didn't mention I came east to go to college. I was an undergraduate at Colorado College in the 1970s. I want to first call attention, if I may be permitted the gaucherie, to call attention to an item of my apparel. I have on a tie here. You might think, well, it doesn't really match his suit, but the reason I wear it is it has light bulbs on it. Now, I wear this tie because, of course, this issue is about keeping the lights on. And it's keeping the lights on directly, the lights, but it's keeping the lights on for the American economy and the Colorado economy. Now, I have a handout, and it's over there, and maybe someone will pass it out for those of you who didn't get it. It has this very dull-looking cover, which is the EPA's summary of the Colorado plan. Let me put this in the context of where we are. Since 2007, the United States economy and largely the global economy has flatlined. And there are many reasons for this, but I would put to you something that's on a graph on the handout, which is historically, since the Second World War, the United States had 3.4% per annum economic growth. And we have about 1% per annum population growth, so that's a plus 2.4% per year. Since the great financial meltdown and the federal government's response to it, we have been lucky to have 1 to 2% growth, and it now looks like we're entering another recession. There are many reasons for this stagnation, but I think the regulatory strangulation of the economy is one of the principal reasons. We can talk about tax cuts, and I know some candidates can't get off the idea that if we just have a tax cut, we'll get the economy going again. Well, when President Reagan had the big tax cuts, it was the top rate went from 70% down to 30-some%. We're now at 35%. Well, if we get it down to 30, is that going to have the same impact that the Reagan tax cuts had, the Kemp-Roth tax cuts? I don't think so. And one of the reasons is because the regulatory noose has been put around so many segments of the economy in the meantime, in the succeeding decades. So one of the largest parts of the regulatory strangulation of the economy is environmental regulation. And in your handout, there is a summary page of my colleague Wayne Cruz's 10,000 Commandments. The identified costs of regulation to the economy are now $1.9 trillion per year. That's over 10% of the US GDP, 1.9 trillion. And that does not include the opportunity costs of investments and jobs that are not created because of the regulations, right? It's just the actual compliance costs of the current regulatory state. The single biggest chunk is EPA. The Department of the Interior has a big chunk as well with, for example, the Endangered Species Act. And so we're at close to $400 billion a year right now in environmental regulations from EPA, but we now have the President's climate agenda. And the first thing I want to tell you is the so-called Clean Power Plan, and let me digress for a moment. The Clean Power Plan, don't call it that. It's giving away the game. It's the existing source performance standard for power plants, and there's another rule, the NSPS, the New Source Performance Standards for new power plants. And together I would call these the costly power plant, the colossally costly power plant, or you might just call it the Obama power grab. But this is only a piece of the entire agenda. So you have to get to really understand what's going on here. I think I want to point out what the whole where this fits into the whole agenda. But first, let me just say a little bit to add to what Ray said. What does the costly power plan do? As Ray mentioned, it takes away control from the states of the electric power grid. Your Public Utility Commission, your legislature, and your governor are now ruled by the EPA. What is the purpose? The purpose is to raise your electric rates. It isn't to save the world from global warming, it's to raise your electric rates. How much? Well, in your packet, there is the Energy Information Administration list of all the state power rates. Compare your rates, and I've underlined your rates, to California's. The average rate in California is, well, I've forgotten. I think it's 15 for overall. In Colorado, it's 9.5. Colorado is right around the national average, which has been going up as a result of these policies to force more renewable energy into the grid. 29 states, including Colorado, have renewable portfolio standards which require the utilities to provide a certain percentage of power from renewable sources. Colorado is one of the leaders in that. You have one of the worst RPSs, but yours is not nearly as bad as California's, for example. California's economy is a basket case. One of the reasons is because they have among the highest power rates in the country. If you want to compare other basket cases, look at New York and New England. Again, they have among the highest power rates in the country. All of the industrial might of this country has now been concentrated in the coal belt. Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri. Those states have our manufacturing now. California used to have a lot of manufacturing. It has very little today. They outsource all of their energy-intensive goods. So the effects of the costly power plan are, first of all, impoverishment of people. People will pay more for electricity. What does that do? Well, if you're upper middle class or wealthy, it doesn't do a whole lot because the amount you pay on your electric bill every month is a small percentage of your income. If you're in the lower 40–50% of the income brackets, it's taking a lot of money out of your pocket. What does that do to the economy? Well, it means you spend less on other things. It means you have less money to spend on, hiking gear or craft beer. And yet, these are the kinds of companies that support this stuff. Have they ever considered where their customers, if they have less money in their pocket because they're paying higher energy bills, they're going to have less money to spend on their products. And finally, it destroys manufacturing, and I've already mentioned that. So, what must we do to stop the costly power plan, and what must we do to undermine and eventually stop the Obama climate agenda? Well, first of all, Ray talked about where we are in the courts. We got some good news and then some very tragic news. There is the state resistance, which Ray mentioned but didn't go into. It's quite complicated. The states, if they do not, I'm at 10 and I have what, 12? I have 15, so I have 5 more minutes. I have 10 more minutes. That's impossible. No, that's impossible. Okay. 26 state attorneys general are suing, plus 3 other state PUCs and things. I mean, it's kind of mixed up. But 29 states are against the costly power plan in court. some states are mounting resistance internally. They are saying we are not going to submit a plan, or we are only going to submit a plan for what is called building block 1, that is improving the efficiency of a conventional coal or gas plant that already exists. So there's all kinds of things going on at the state level, and that is helping in Washington, because when legislators, when members of Congress, House and Senate know that their governor and their attorney general and their state legislature and their PUC are against something, that helps them fight it. So not coincidentally, the biggest opponent of all this in Washington, D.C. is Senator Mitch McConnell, who comes from the state that is most dependent on coal production and coal-fired electricity, Kentucky. Now, so let me talk about Congress. In the last year, the Interior EPA appropriation bill in the House had a rider that said you can't implement these plants, either the ESPS or the NSPS. The Senate Interior EPA bill had the same riders. Neither of those bills got to the floor for complicated reasons. Neither were passed into law. And at the end of the year, we had the omnibus appropriations bill. Both of those riders were not included in the omnibus. We lost. And in fact, all of the riders that the appropriations committees had put in the bills that were on environmental issues were dropped. So it was a complete disaster. So now let me conclude by talking about what we've got coming up. This year, we've got the same fight over putting riders in the appropriations bills. The state action, for example, Attorney General Kaufman, Cynthia Kaufman, is one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit. This is extremely important. This means that you have a leverage with some of your members of Congress in Colorado. Not all, we know which ones, but you have some leverage, and you need to use that leverage. You need to say, we need to go after this in Congress through the appropriations process. And then finally, we have, of course, the next presidential administration, and things will go one way or the other here. And I would just, in your packet, I have put some things on the Paris Climate Treaty. This, we have reached a very important point in the global warming debate that has been going on since the late 1980s. In Paris in December, 196 parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change signed the Paris Climate Treaty. President Obama says it's just an agreement, an executive agreement, and it doesn't require Senate ratification, even though it requires all kinds of changes in American law and regulations. But somehow it's not a treaty. The interesting thing about the Paris Climate Treaty is the United States' contribution to it, the Clean Power Plan, the Costly Power Plan, and the NSPS, and the CAFE standards, and the wind and solar tax credits, and all these other things. All of these are part of that plan, but if you look at the plan, you will see, as Steve Yulee has done at the U.S. Chamber, it only reaches about 50% of the U.S. commitment. Only about 50% of the U.S. commitment. Now, what does this mean? It means that if we keep going down this path, if we allow the Costly Power Plan and the other parts of the Obama climate agenda to be implemented, we will be down a road which will keep going and going and going, right? This is only step one. So those people in the utility sector, if Xcel Energy comes to you and says, oh, we can do this and it won't raise your rates that much, you need to understand that this is just the first increment. As soon as they get this done, they need more. So each increment is going to be more expensive. So if you think you can stand paying California electric rates here in Colorado based on the Colorado income, which is lower than the average person who lives in San Francisco or LA, just keep in mind that this is just phase one. So this is a very critical issue. We have to win this. We have to do what it takes. We have to figure out a way to undermine and eventually defeat and block the Obama climate agenda. If we don't, it's going to get worse and worse for our economy and for our country, and I think for the whole world. So thank you very much.
So real quick, show you how long our relationship with CEI has been. Wayne Cruz actually penned a paper for us in 1999 talking about electricity deregulation. At that point, residential rates, I think, were maybe under 6 cents a kilowatt hour. We just passed out something that shows you, according to the Energy Information Administration, what has happened to residential, commercial, industrial, and transportation rates since then. Thank you to Michael Sandoval for that. Also, even before the costly power plan, the controversial power plan, whatever you want to call it, Xcel Energy projected that rates would go to, by 2030, closer to Germany's rates. They actually submitted a chart, a graph. I have it if anybody's interested. Closer to 38 cents a kilowatt hour. That was before Obama era. So this is not going to get better unless we stop it. With that, I do want to take questions, and I hope you guys don't mind. Ray, the first question, I'm going to go to you because Colorado has an interesting sort of power struggle, and it's a bad pun. But we have A.G. Kaufman, who is part of the lawsuit. We have Colorado's Department of Public Health and Environment and the governor's office, which have both said they intend to comply with a rule that isn't in effect. We have the state legislature, Republicans in the state legislature at the state Senate side. Shout out Senator John Cook, who's been leading the charge against the Clean Power Plan, and yes, I am married to him. So, it's called, what do they call that? Personal privilege on the floor of the Senate. We've had legislation at the state legislature to fight this. Explain what that power struggle looks like, and ultimately, who prevails on this?
Yeah, it's one of the more in the weeds, but fundamentally important aspects of this rule is it really does create a state institutional crisis in this sense, which is when you look at what the Clean Power Plan requires of a state, is it requires what I would describe as carbon resource planning. You optimize your electric system to minimize carbon. And who does that traditionally is the PUC. Well, who enforces this rule is the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, who has really no experience with resource planning. Then you layer on top of that every state that has adopted cap and trade so far at the state level. There are 13 northeastern states that are part of something called RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. California has what's called its AB 32 carbon trading regime. They did it through passing state legislation. Well, what the governor's office has said is we can just take the EPA delegation, which, by the way, has now stayed, and do anything we need through the administrative process at CDPHE. The PUC kind of hangs out back there in the back and shows up with the bill. I mean, the PUCs in this country become monumentally irrelevant short of showing up with the bill. And then you get one final layer of political economy that really makes your head hurt, which is utilities don't respect state boundaries necessarily. Tri-state is called tri-state because, ironically, it's in 5 states. But it's got generation from Wyoming to Arizona. Xcel's generation is all here. The Munis is all here. But here's the problem that you end up with at the state level, a war between the utilities. Because if you are a coal-centric utility, a municipal utility, Platte River Power Authority, Tri-State, you are going to incur enormous transition costs, and you almost by definition have the lowest power rates in the state because you are running older coal plants, which are generally the cheapest form of electricity. Black Hills, by contrast, has gone to all gas. That's going over really well in Pueblo if you visited there. And Xcel has made about half of its transition away from coal through the Clean Air, Clean Jobs Act, which they didn't get full credit for from EPA, unfortunately for them. But the point being is you have all these different emitters within the state, and they encounter enormous incentives to foist their costs onto other people, if that makes sense, right? If I'm Tri-State or I'm Platte River Power Authority and I'm looking at catastrophic rate increases as I switch my power supply, I'll tell you what I want to do as a matter of public policy. I have a sincere desire for Xcel ratepayers to pay for my carbon credits. So it becomes very war of all against all, both within the state agencies, between the legislature and the governor, and between the utilities, who have very different incentives when you get to actually devising a carbon plan.
And it sounds like between ratepayers too, because you're going to have one group of ratepayers that has to pay for, is just going to have to pay for what they've done in the past, but also pay for things going forward. So let me take questions from the audience. Who has questions? Let's start right over here.
Well, full disclosure, I represent Black Hills. What is happening in Pueblo? Black Hills which is the investor-owned utility in Pueblo. Black Hills is the prototype utility that has enacted Colorado's energy policy, which is you retire your coal, you go to straight natural gas as your base load, and you comply with the renewable mandate. They've had to do that in a very short time, given some historical circumstances that are not of their making, but they are the low carbon emitting utility in the state because they're all natural gas as their backbone with wind and a little bit of solar. They're not very popular in Pueblo right now because they've had to have all that capital cost running through to the ratepayers. And that's when you look at specifically the utility under the Clean Power Plan that looks the most challenged to me in the state is Platte River Power Authority. Platte River, which has the lowest rates in the state. Why do they have the lowest rates in the state? They have an old coal plant. They have an old coal plant that's generating 2 cents a kilowatt hour power. Well, if I show up and say, you got to shut that down, I'm from the EPA, shut that down, and go build a new gas turbine. And oh, by the way, in the weeds of the EPA's new rule is they don't want you to do that either. They really just want you to do renewables.
Sure.
It's a one-way street. And that's part of kind of the political insidiousness of these EPA rules is utility planning cycles, and this is just welcome to the utility world, kids, are so long, right? If I need to retire a coal plant and build a gas plant, under Clean Air, Clean Jobs, for instance, we retired, Colorado law said that Xcel would retire Cherokee 4, the biggest coal unit south in Denver. We made that decision in 2011, beginning of 2011. That unit doesn't come offline till next year. So when you're talking about a 7-year planning cycle, and that's why EPA's interim goal is so effective, which is if I'm a utility, whether I hate the rule or I love the rule, if I think there's a chance I have to meet this interim goal in 2022, or let's move it out 2 more years because of the Supreme Court stay, 2024, I have to decide now that I have to shut down that coal plant. And in 2024, when the peasants and pitchforks are coming at me because my rates just jumped 20 or 30%. My answer is, sorry, I got nothing to do. All I got is a turbine and a wind farm.
Kim, you had a question? Kim asked, what is the elevator speech to the busy mom? How do we get her involved? How do we get her active? How do we make this matter at the kitchen table?
I hate that question. It's always so difficult to give an elevator speech, and I don't have one. But look, if you like to pay more for gasoline, you'll love what they're doing for the electric power grid. People don't pay much attention to the electric power grid because your bill comes and you sort of don't pay attention to it, whether it's gone up a lot. But you see the gas prices every day, and when the gas got up to $3.50 or $4 a gallon, people were really angry. I think what we have to do is we have to explain that what's being done to the electric sector is what happens when you get $4 a gallon gasoline. I would also add this long-term planning has got a problem once we add more and more renewables to it, because renewables are intermittent sources, which means you have to have backup power, and backup power is conventional power. And primarily it's a gas turbine, because gas turbines you can turn off and on without wasting as much energy. You waste energy, but not as much as with a coal-fired power plant. Well, the fact is that when you get up to a certain percentage of renewables and you have a huge intermittency problem, these conventional plants are no longer profitable, so the utilities want to shut them down. But they can't shut them down because otherwise the grid will start having blackouts and brownouts. So what's going on? Well, we can see what's going on because it's already happening in Europe. In the UK, in the United Kingdom, the government had to have an auction to pay generators to stay available online. They thought that natural gas turbines, which were essentially just big jet engines, would make their bids, and they're not bidding to pay for it. They're bidding how much will it cost the government to keep these generators open and available. Every single winner of the auction was a diesel generator. So they're going to have 500 diesel generators around London to keep the lights on.
And Kim, I don't know there's a great elevator speech to this because it's so in the weeds and so kind of removed immediately. I would point out the potency of the other side is unbelievable. The environmental left is headed regionally by the Center for New Energy Economy up at Colorado State University with our former Governor Ritter. They have more resources and are on the ground with this plan in an unbelievable way. I was on a call 2 weeks ago. The Arizona Department of Environmental Quality had their opening Clean Power Plan workshop. They made everybody identify themselves. At 10 environmental groups, I stopped counting. And I wouldn't count anybody on the call as necessarily pro low-cost energy. 10 in Arizona. CDPHE's had a couple of their workshops. It is, Environment Colorado, or can't remember what they're, they all kind of blend together in your mind. They have a table out front. I mean, you walked into the Commerce City CDPHE thing, it looked like their event.
Yeah, the Sierra Club had a table. Michael Sandoval got a picture of it, had a table right in front of the EPA CDPHE stakeholders meeting. But Kim, I want to answer that real quick as a mom, working mom. Meet Sharon Garcia, working mom out of Pueblo. It's how to not shut down a coal-fired power plant. And it was, it said, if you don't manage it well, this is what happens. Sharon Garcia, single working mom. She was profiled in the Washington Post about how she's had her power shut off, how her electricity rates have gone up dramatically. She pays $850 a month for rent, and she pays $200 a month simply to keep the lights on. She's not interested in a government handout. What she's interested in is being able to pay her electricity bill. So it's in the Washington Post. If you search that, Sharon Garcia, or how to not shut down a coal plant, you'll find it. It's a great article, and I encourage everybody to read it, because if it's not managed well, this is what it looks like. And the controversial, costly power plant is not managed well. Dale, you had a question real quick? Yeah. And then we'll go back.
Well, it's complicated, but some states are saying they're not going to comply, and that means the EPA can now foist upon them a federal implementation plan as opposed to a state implementation plan. Ray can talk about the legalities of that and what the state will have to do, what the state legislature and governor will have to do to actually accept that. It's very complicated. But some states are saying we'll do building block 1, which is within EPA's legal authority, which is, the one thing that did not come out of what we spoke about is what the EPA is doing here is illegal in a whole bunch of different ways, right? And the lawyers here may already know that, and the rest of you may not be interested. And I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not particularly interested. But it's illegal in a whole bunch of ways. But there is one thing that EPA can do, and that is they can tell a stationary source, a coal plant or a natural gas plant, that if you want to keep operating, you have to improve your efficiency. That's legal. All this other stuff, taking over the state power grid, is illegal. So, for example, North Carolina has said we're going to submit a plan. It's going to be building block 1. And then we'll I think Ray can talk about the legalities.
Yeah, and I mean, part of the audacity of the rule, it is so illegal in so many ways that most Clean Air Act lawyers just don't know where to start. And I think the audacity of it is part of its strength, insofar as there's so many things that you have never seen before, and it is so totalistic in the way it redefines EPA as the governor of the nation's electric grid to plan for carbon. But by the same token, every Clean Air Act appellate lawyer I've talked to in D.C. looks at the 3 judges on that panel and says, we're going to lose that case at the D.C. Circuit. The federal plan, which has not been finalized, and I'm not sure if EPA said anything about that post-stay, but everybody expected the federal plan was going to be a mass-based trading scheme, which is state-by-state cap and trade, by which it means you can trade carbon credits across the state and between units to keep a coal plant alive, for instance. Your renewable energy credits would be able to create currency, if you will, to trade. Your coal plant would have to eat currency, and to keep it open, you'd have to buy enough credits to lower your carbon limit below, in Colorado, the 1147.
So in other words, Wyoming would have to purchase credits from California simply to be able to generate coal electricity.
Yeah, and should be a study out sometime this spring by an economist up at University of Wyoming, talking about the size of those transfer payments, because essentially what and Myron talked about it, what this plan does in effect is it brings California's energy policy to the rest of the nation. And so you have to bring up all of the electricity rates in the Midwest and the West to parity with California and the Northeast. You do that slowly, kind of like boiling the frog, as it were, and that's the way utility rates move. It again gets back to that lead time problem. You're not going to see those costs for 6 or 7 years when Plant A retires and you bring a new one into the rates. But essentially, the federal plan will be cap and trade, and it became very clear in the final rule, between the potential and the final rule, EPA kind of took off the mask and said, states, you have all the flexibility in the world, but there's really only one answer we want to hear back from you, which is do mass-based carbon trading.
Yeah, go.
I would just point out, I would remind you that when President Obama took office in 2009 and he had a Democratic majority in both chambers of Congress, cap and trade legislation was defeated by the Congress, and we're now going to get it through administrative fiat. The other thing I would point out to you from what Ray said about imposing California's energy policies on the rest of the nation, that will also impose California's economy on the rest of the nation, and it will eventually impose California's politics on the rest of the nation. It's not coincidental that the states that get it in the neck with the costly power plan are overwhelmingly conservative Republican. It is not coincidental.
Real quick, if with the stay, though, a federal plan cannot be foisted upon the states right now, right? With the state. Okay. All right. So you guys, there's one guy back there who writes or signs my check, and he has a question. So it's nothing personal to. This is the guy.
Is that just for this plan, or is that all the other plans put together? I think the EPA's. Yeah. What is the net effect of the Clean Power Plan on global climate change? I think was the answer. And that is the Clean Power Plan, or the costly power plan rather, has virtually no effect, the 0.02 of a degree or 0.2 of a degree by 2030. 2/200ths. Yeah. The point being, and the way it's justified with a fairly straight face is if we lead, the rest of the world will follow. So if we put ourselves out there as a moral paragon of carbon restraint, then China and India and the rest of the developing world that is not even been through their coal phase of industrialization will just leap over that and go to windmills and solar panels.
All right, John, my boss.
I'm always fascinated about the political coalitions behind this. We blame the environmental left. We know what they're up to. But there's also a business side to this. From what you guys have described, if I was a coal plant or a coal factory or a mine, I would hate this. But if I'm Halliburton or Exxon or any one of our frackers, I think this is a windfall for me. I get to build, they're going to build not only natural gas generators, but backup natural gas generators, and then in London, backup diesel generators. So doesn't this split what we would think would be a pro-energy coalition?
No, and for a couple reasons, John. Between the first rule, the proposed rule, and the final rule, EPA, to EPA's mind, fixed the gas loophole because what a utility saw, what anybody saw in the proposed rule is you just shut down your coal plants and build gas. And in a world of $2 gas, that hurts, but it doesn't hurt tremendously so. In a world of $6 gas, it really hurts. But between the proposed and the final rule, EPA made the assumption that there would be no net addition of gas capacity onto the electric grid. Meaning, I kid you not, these are their assumptions, that the vast majority of new capacity coming online to meet the Clean Power Plan's mandate would be renewable.
But renewable requires a natural gas backup because the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow.
Okay, you clearly are not going to be down at Region 8 doing resource plans because in the EPA's world, you can add massive quanta of renewable energy and hold the amount of gas capacity on the system constant. And as Myron said, coal is the first course, gas is the second course. And here's another dilemma that a utility faces, even if they could add gas, is the used and useful life for a gas plant is 20 years, 25 years. If I have to, in 2024, put in a new gas plant to make up for my retired coal plant, well, in 2034, they're going to tell me to shut down the gas plant. So how do I come up with the money to go build a new gas plant if I have to recover back those capital costs in 10 years? Well, the answer is if you recover them in 10 years, it's a much higher rate bump.
Could I give I'll give I agree with everything Ray said, but I'd like to give you the political answer. This is a classic Baptists and bootleggers coalition that, I think many of you have heard that. The Baptists provide the moral high ground and the bootleggers provide the money to run the campaign. Well, here we've had the renewable energy industry. Why are they willing to invest so much when they're such a small industry? Well, it's because unless they get these political changes that subsidize their industry, their company and their industry is worth zero. Whereas it's not that big a deal for oil and gas because it's just a part of their capitalization is at stake. And coal, the problem with the coal industry, they have never fought this effectively. And one of the reasons is because coal is an incredibly cheap source of energy. You don't make that much on it, but you produce huge quantities of energy for very little. And so they've never had the economic wherewithal that ExxonMobil has had, for example. Peabody is the world's biggest coal company, and their annual sales would be about Exxon 1 week sales, right? So this is why, and now coal is worthless. It's the capitalization is now, they're all going bankrupt. And so what do we have? We have an industry that didn't fight effectively when they were going well, and now they can't fight at all because they don't have any cash to fight with. So we have a huge problem just in the resources on each side, because the ethanol industry, the solar industry, and the wind industry can spend massive amounts of money to get these mandates and subsidies, because without them, they're worth zero.
Of the omnibus? So the question is, how did all the amendments fall, or the riders fall off of the spending bill? Or the budget bill?
If anyone knows the inner workings of the Republican majority and the Democratic minority and how this happened, please stand up and explain. I will say two things. One is it's very hard to keep this stuff intact in an omnibus as opposed to an individual appropriations bill, because the president can threaten to shut down the entire government over one thing he doesn't like. The second thing is that I identify with the Tea Party Republicans on these issues. But the Tea Party members in Congress took themselves out of the negotiations because they announced that they weren't going to vote for it no matter what. So the Republican leadership in the House and the Senate had to go to the Democrats to get enough support to pass the omnibus. Now, they did too good a job. They got almost all the Democrats. They should have done a less good job, and maybe they could have gotten something. But we lost the Green Climate Fund rider, the Waters of the U.S. Rider, the 2 power plant riders, the social cost of carbon rider, and a couple more. So, it was a disaster.
Sean, you had a question?
I'll give a very short political answer, and then Ray can give you the details in Colorado. Look, the utilities want to do whatever is required. So they're going to be leaning on your state government and your PUC to let's go ahead and we'll figure out how to make this work. Just point out to them, have you thought that this is only step one? That once we have this plan, we're now going to have a second plan and a third plan and a fourth plan, and we'll have it on the oil industry, on the gas industry, on manufacturers, on automobiles, on everything. So if this goes through, it's I can't get why, I don't understand why the other industries are not jumping on this, because when you're in a war, you like one group of people in the front line and you're in the back line. But if they all get shot, then you're in the front line, right? Well, the manufacturers and the oil and gas industry ought to understand that if coal goes, then they're next, right? Heavy manufacturing is a dead duck in this country. So I would just say we need to push back against the utilities, and in states that have very strong governors, state legislatures, and attorneys general like Texas, Oklahoma, West Virginia, Kentucky, that is happening. In Colorado, you've got a mixed bag.
So the question is there wiggle room on the timeline? And so, Ray, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think everybody knows that the timeline is going to slip now that the stay has been entered. So you're probably looking at an interim goal of 2024 instead of 2022. And you know, Myron's right. Different utilities have slightly different takes on this. The CEO of Pacific Corp, which is Warren Buffett's utility, has can barely contain his glee at the quote unquote investment opportunity that this presents. But for a utility like a cooperative or a municipal utility, this is a potential catastrophe. And I told the Wyoming REAs this fall that the choices I could see for them were secede and join Canada or go seek a bailout from Congress, which the latter seems more likely now that Trudeau's up there. But the point being, though, and this is, I represent utilities, so I maybe have more sympathy than a lot of people in this room. They're still in the horns of a dilemma, which is they're the ones that are required to keep the lights on. They're the ones who are dealing with 5, 7, 10-year planning horizons that are real, all right? I mean, if you want to build a transmission line from, anywhere, it's a 10-year process. And if you want to build a gas plant, it's a 5-year process. So if you see these potential carbon bogeys coming down and your carbon budget getting cranked down, you as a utility have to start making some cost benefit decisions, even if you want to keep the rates low and say, okay, do I go buy credits and keep this coal plant running? What are the credits going to cost? And part of the answer to that right now is nobody knows, because how many states are going to be in the cap and trade scheme? So enormous, very fine-grained and complex and mind-numbing institutional questions and market design questions present themselves, the answer to which is no one has any answer, and EPA is the last agency that understands how a carbon market might work. Because for a carbon market to work, remember, what it has to do is induce you to shut down your coal.
Kelsey, you had a question? So the question is, working with private sector unions, in particular United Mine Workers, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. I don't know if they've weighed in to you all.
Yeah, well, not the problem. It's either a feature or a bug. The Powder River Basin is largely non-union, which is the largest coal, the largest coal field in the country. The more deep union states are Kentucky and West Virginia, and they're kind of dead already. Don't repeat that to them, but it's much higher cost and it's much higher sulfur content coal. So they're really in their death throes already. The unions, I think in the Midwest and the manufacturing states should be more engaged. Strangely, Michigan, with a Republican governor, had been one of the more enthusiastic participants in the Clean Power Plan and had said, Governor Snyder had said before Flint blew up on him that we're gonna comply and Michigan will do a plan. So the labor coalition in today's Democratic Party, I think, is irrelevant to the green billionaires.
And West Virginia, by the way, just became the 26th state to pass right to work. So
could I add something? The union, the coal miners union, is very small, and about 80% or 90% of the members are actually retired. So what they're concerned about is their pensions. And so the two Democratic candidates for president have tried to win on the coal issue by going to coal country and saying, we're going to have programs to help you, and we will make sure that the federal government will guarantee your pension after your company goes bankrupt, because Arch Coal is in bankruptcy, Alpha Resources is in bankruptcy, and so on. So we get the same thing. I talked about electric rates going up, and it hurts poor people more than wealthy people because they pay a higher percentage of their income for energy. Well, the left's response to that is we need more welfare payments to help those people meet their electric bills. I mean, so
Right.
these issues get very mixed up when you start talking about redistribution of wealth.
So you pay your own bill, plus you're paying somebody else's. Mike,
So
the question was, is
Yeah,
nuclear, and I'm doing this for the Ustream,
Yep.
Is nuclear energy even in the discussion anymore? Ray?
There are about 4 or 5 reactors under construction right now in the U.S. One down in Georgia. TVA's got a reactor, and I think maybe 1 or 2 down in Texas. Yeah. Now, strangely, reactors are closing at the same time because of market imperfections, and they can't earn enough money to stay in the market, mainly because there's so much wind in the Midwest that is driving in Texas that drives the market price to zero. And if you own a nuclear plant, it's still running when you're not getting paid. The problem with nuclear is the capital cost is insane. Dominion Utilities just proposed in the last month to complete a new unit at one of its power stations. The expected capital cost is $19.2 billion with a B for a 1,200 megawatt station. By way of comparison, you can build a 500 megawatt combined cycle gas for about $600 million.
A lot of the capital cost of nuclear now is part of it is we haven't built any for so long that there's no, if we started building them, the cost would go down. The second is that the regulatory hurdles that have been created for the nuclear industry probably triple the price of the plant.
No, absolutely. But the capital costs are so enormous that you put in gas.
We have, let me get this one last question here, and then we are at 1:30. Oh, I'm sorry. We've got, hold on.
Two quick, we'll make quick answers.
You mentioned in passing what our governor's Hickenlooper's position is. Can you reiterate that?
So,
Governor Hickenlooper's, his stance on the Clean Power Plan.
yeah, Governor Hickenlooper, after the Supreme Court stayed the rule, said that that Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment was going to continue with its workshop process and continue to develop a compliance plan.
I think you should let.
Yep. So the question is, if there is a Republican president elected in November, will they reverse course? Can they reverse course on this?
Very briefly, because the rule has been stayed, it will not be final before the next president takes office, which means it can be unraveled much more easily than if it is absolutely in place, where you have to go back and do the rulemaking all over again, which takes time, and you get all sorts of opposition from the people who've already bought into it and made investments. Senators Rubio and Cruz have stated very, very clearly that the costly power plan and the rest of the Obama, I'm getting ahead of myself here with Hillary. The Obama climate agenda will be dismantled. Paris will be never be implemented. Governor Bush has said that he will appoint the best people and they will do the right thing. And Donald, well, that should scare people if they know about the previous 2 Bush incumbents of the White House. Mr. Trump has said that he thinks global warming is a hoax, but he likes to make deals.
Yeah, I think briefly, I think assuming that the Republicans have a candidate and can win, one of the transition teams needs to do a lot of research on emergency rulemaking under the Administrative Procedures Act. Myron's right. The stay is actually would create an opportunity to shut it down kind of ab initio. But if the stay weren't in effect, or you take any of the myriad of other terrible EPA rules, you can do emergency rulemakings with the proper findings and the proper record and undo this stuff relatively quickly, because once a rule goes final, absent that kind of emergency rulemaking sprint that can be laborious and is going to subject you to plenty of lawsuits from the environmental left, you're stuck with it for a while. And the problem with the rule that I see right now is it's gaining prescriptive authority even though it's not legal.
So everybody, thank you for being here. We're out of time. We actually went past time. I know some of you have some more questions. I don't know if you two gentlemen can hang around for a few more minutes, but let's give a hand to Ray and to Myron. Thank you for being here. Real quickly, information along the table there, including CEI pins, Enjoy Capitalism, as well as business reply envelopes. We can't do this without your support, so feel free to support those nonprofits that are doing the good work. Thanks, everybody.